Fusion Mobile, quality e-learning experience on the go.
Hello and you're welcome to Fusion Mobile e-learning platform. My name is Jacob Uchenna and you're welcome to a study session on economics. Today we'll be looking at international trade and balance of payment. International trade is actually what makes the world go round, and what makes nations that do not have get what they cannot produce. Nations that have too much, you can actually take it to where they don't have. So actually in our study session today we'll be looking at different subtopics. The first we'll be looking at the meaning and definitions of international trade, forms of international trade, reasons for international trade, problems, advantages of international trade, disadvantages, the terms in international trade we'll be looking at. We'll look at free trade and protection, infant industries, tariffs, import, export, entry-port, terms of trade, balance of payment, export drive. Then we take a look at currency devaluation, counter trade, and economic integration. Lastly, and but not least, is international trade theories. Now these subtopics will make up what we'll be studying today under the topic international trade. Now, starting with the meaning, like we were saying before, that international trade involves the buying, selling, and exchange of goods and services between two or more countries. In such cases, that means that before you can talk about international trade, it has to go across the borders of countries. Now, when you now talk about the various forms of trade agreements that you can get, now that leads us to the forms of international trade. Forms of international trade could be bilateral or multilateral. Bilateral trade agreements or multilateral trade agreements. When we have bilateral trade agreements, we are saying the bilateral trade agreements means a form of international trade only between two countries. A country would be the supplier, just only one country will be the buyer. But when we talk about multilateral trade agreements refer to the form of trade that comprises more than two countries. Now, so which means bilateral is just comprising two, multilateral involves more than two. Then, now, what are the things that bring about international trade? Now we know that no country is an island, and countries depend on each other for things to happen. Now, for these things we are saying, things that will happen, for instance, transfer of technology, income, and so on and so forth. Now, what are the things that necessitate international trade? That leads us to number 3, which is reasons for international trade. Of course, number 1, we talk about what? Inequitable distribution of resources. 2, difference in the quantity and quality of factors of production. 3, transfer of technology. These are reasons, okay? We now come down to reasons for international trade. From what we can see now, the international trade, we have 6 itemized some reasons that account for the relevance of international trade. We have what? Inequitable distribution of resources. Now, when we say inequitable distribution of resources, we are recognizing the fact that resources and natural resources are not distributed evenly from place to place. That means that what a particular place is endowed with is different from what the other place is endowed with. So in other words, there is need for international trade. International trade is necessitated for those areas that have in abundance to be able to transfer to those that are deficient of such resources. The next one we have are differences in the quality of factors of production. Factors of production are the production inputs. Different skills, different productivity levels exist between different countries, definitely because of the way they are combined or because of their nature and so on. For instance, when we look at the third world countries that are actually mostly agriculturally inclined, we find out that the productivity of labor of manual labor in that case is really higher than those in the westernized world. But when we now come down to the skilled laborer part of it, we notice that things within the Western world, skilled labor is much productive, definitely because of possibly the level of training and level of development they have. And the next one, we have what differences in technology. Technology talks about what technical know-how, how things are combined, how A combines with B, how X combines with Y to produce a particular thing. Two people can combine two things and have different outcomes. It all depends on the know-how, the technology. So a country, when there are differences in technology, it is only it's supposed to mean that a particular country will definitely have an edge over the other. And in such cases, the result is specialization, which now leads to international trade. Then the need for market expansion, to create more market, to create higher demand, to create an international market for locally made goods. That becomes one of the reasons for international trade. Then the next one, differences in the level of industrialization. Industrialization, here we are talking about the level of industrial development, infrastructural development, production, and so on. There are countries that are producers. There are some that are there are more consumers than producers. So now, in such cases, those kind of resources are channeled. Industrialized countries produce industrialized products that are sent down to the agrarian economies and so on and so forth. So when there are differences in climatic conditions or climate, talks about the various things, the various productive capacities that come up as a result of climatic conditions. Climatic conditions here we are talking about, for instance, some parts could have, in fact, it relates to agricultural products. Some parts could be blessed with the production of a particular thing, a particular crop, due to their climate. And even the climate could actually lead to the kind of activities that could be performed in such an area. Now we take a look at the problems. The next point of call will be the problems of international trade. Now, of course, we have the problem of distance. In order to convey things, in order to convey goods and services, the distance could be, of course, takes a lot of time, or days or even months to get the wares or the stocks or the goods and services to where they are needed. In most cases, this becomes a problem because For instance, a particular service could be needed, and it is the services of an expatriate that is required. So which means that nothing can be done of the situation at a particular time until the number of days or weeks that it will take for the expert from another country to arrive. The same thing that happens with exportation or importation of goods. Certain goods, especially the ones imported by the sea, through the sea transport, takes months before they will get here, and certain things could happen on the way. So that is where distance becomes a problem. Then we have currency differences. Before an importing country can actually buy from another country, it has to change its currency into the currency of the country that is exporting. So in other words, currency differences, it makes international trade a bit laborious. Then the next one is language barriers. It is quite difficult for two different countries that do not speak that speak different languages to trade. Of course, it is easier for instance, Francophone countries. They can trade with France, trade with French-speaking countries. But when it has to do with countries that are not that do not have the same language, or that do not understand such language, then communication and trade becomes difficult. Then political instability in the political atmosphere. This actually has a problem of scaring away foreigners from. Then you have artificial barriers such as protectionist laws and trade restrictions that will come up as a result of the policies of the country. Then the next one is negative treatment of foreigners. In the specific case of the xenophobic attacks and so on and so forth, that makes certain things that might happen, okay, that where foreigners are not treated properly or treated with enough hospitality, then international trade is hampered. Now, so now, the next point we'll look at from our subtopic is advantages of international trade. We'll just take a few of them, because from the reasons for international trade, we will be able to get certain things, certain advantages for international trade, engaging in international trade brings about. Number one is that there is redistribution of resources. When we say redistribution of resources, we are talking about one of the reasons for international trade, which says that resources are not distributed equitably. Then international trade enables those unevenly distributed resources to be distributed from the surplus areas to the deficient areas. Second advantage is that it leads to expansion of the world market, okay, making the market for locally made goods to be expanded. That means more markets internationally for local made goods. Then also through international trade, the government can actually raise some income when they introduce things like tariffs or import duties, as the case may be. And when import licenses are issued, these things lead to Lead to generation of income to the government. Also, the other one is that international trade can actually generate employment opportunities. Now, Activities abound in international trade: clearing and forwarding, importation, exportation, distribution, and so on. Now, these things will yield, these firms that are engaged in such will definitely create an avenue for employment for the teeming population. And then the next point, the next advantage we would look at is that international trade helps increasing the standard of living. Increasing standard of living, of course, the things we can produce, we get them through international trade. So which means through interdependence, we get to live up to the standard of what we cannot by ourselves produce. Then the next one we could talk about, we say that it facilitates transfer of technology. Transfer of technology from less developed countries to what? From more developed to less developed, to help in economic growth and development, and so on. Then when we now look at the next point there, we have disadvantages of international trade. Disadvantages of international trade. Now, in the case of disadvantages abound from various sources. Disadvantages abound from various angles, depending on the way you look at it. Disadvantages abound from various sources, depending on the way you look at it. For instance, when there's international trade, there is increased interdependence among the nations. One country, definitely, it is not, so which means a less developed country will always be dependent on the place where resources are or goods and services are imported from. So in other words, it does not encourage. The second point is that international trade in most cases does not encourage industrial development. That is where there is what? Over dependence of what? On foreign made goods. Then also it could result in dumping of goods. Talking about the next point here, we'll be talking about disadvantages of international trade. First one, we have that what? It increases dependency. That means reducing self-reliance of nations, or yes, of economies, making them much more dependent on superior ones, or what we'll call the industrialized nations. Now, secondly, when these things, the level of dependency increases, of course, that is just what happens when specialization occurs. It means that you try to get what you cannot produce by engaging in trade with other nations. But the downside of it is that when such happens, it's from leading to dependence, will eventually reduce the level of self-reliance of the economy. Now, in such cases where something happens, where and definitely when it reduces self-reliance, that means that the level of industrial development of the nation will be what? Impeded. When it is impeded, of course, reason is that the infant industry, which is the locally made, the new sections of the economy, will be facing stiff competition from the imported goods from industrialized nations. So, which means that definitely those countries, those industries will not be able to develop at a quick pace. Then, when a country engages in excessive international trade, or in international trade without make the free trade, it would lead to dumping. Dumping in this sense means selling, a situation where goods that are imported goods are sold at prices that are equal or lesser than what it is sold in its home country. That means, for instance, goods are sold imported to Nigeria, but say from the USA, the dollar equivalent of what it is sold in Nigeria will be less than what it is sold over there where it is even produced. So in other words, dumping makes goods to just be flooded, makes foreign goods to be flooding the local economy, and such cases will lead to over-reliance on foreign-made goods and impede industrialization. Importation of harmful products could also result from international trade. Then the fourth one is that it may lead to unemployment. That is where the infantry industries now have to close up, or have to, they can no longer cope with maintenance of labor. Then it will lead to what? Unemployment of resources, both labor and capital. Then it could be injurious to culture. Just take what is happening to most of the third world countries that are now, that even in clothing, in practices, in food, they are now tending towards the culture of the westernized nations. All these are all from international trade. Now, moving down to the next point, we look at what the terms in international trade. Terms in international trade. Terms in international trade. I think we've mentioned quite a few here. On that place, we have the what? The free trade and protection. Free trade is actually a situation whereby a country leaves its borders open with no form of restriction, both for goods that are coming in and goods that are going out of the country. So we call that what? Free trade. But protection, or what we call trade restriction, is the establishment of various rules or parameters or the use of different instruments to limit the inflow of goods into a country. Protectionists, the protection, major reasons for protectionist laws or trade protection is, for number one, to protect infant industries. Infant industries, like we said, are the industries that are in the early stages of production in an economy. That means newly established industries that need the local market to actually energize it or to grow it. So in such cases, they should be protected. Also, to prevent the importation of harmful or dangerous products into a country, the protectionist laws are established. Thirdly, protectionist laws can also be established to limit imports or to limit exports. And another case, number 4 of it, is that protectionist laws are established, or trade protection can be used to raise government revenue. Raising government revenue, of course, through instruments like tariffs, or yes, import duties or export duties. So those could be used to what? To raise the income for the government. Then for the next part, I think we mentioned what infant industries are. Then the tariff imports are definitely goods that are brought into the country from another country. Definitely imports flow into a country and a country spends when it imports. Exports are goods that move out of a country. Then entry port is a practice where goods that are imported into a country are exported to another country. So, but now, by the time we look at this, whether import or export, trade could either be in goods or in services. When trades are in goods, that means merchandise, they are called visible trade. So, which means we have visible imports and we have visible exports, on which tariffs or taxes, of course, import duties are charged when a protectionist law is involved. Then, but now that wraps it up on that. Then we talk about what? The terms of trade. Terms of trade, of course, we know that, or before then, when we talk about protectionist laws, there are different instruments of trade protection, which we are going to see. Of course, first of all, instruments of trade protection. Of trade protection, we have tariff, we have import quota, import license, we have preference, duties, exchange control, ban or embargo. Devaluation. First off, we have tariff. Okay, so we have instruments of trade protection. First of them is tariff. The next one, import quota. The third one, import license, preference duties, ban or embargo imposition, then devaluation of a currency. Now, over here, the tariff talks about the kind of tax that is imposed on imported goods. These tariffs definitely can be used to limit the kind of goods that are imported, check the consumption of harmful products or harmful goods, prevent dumping of goods within the country. That's the importance of tariffs. It could also be used as a source of revenue to the government of the country. Now, the next one is an import quota. Import quota is a particular limit, a limit of a particular product which the importers are allowed to import. Importers of a particular good are allowed to import within a particular time frame. Then the import license is an authority issued to a firm or individual or generally for importation, to allow importation. The next one is preference duties. Preference duties are used to encourage or discourage the importation or exportation of a particular product. In such cases, for instance, where a particular there's an import substitution strategy going on. Now, when we say an import substitution, it means that infant industries are now established to produce locally goods that were hither to that period imported. That means that there will be need to limit the importation of such products into the country, and that will mean that such products will be given so high a duty or tariff such that it will discourage the importation of that product and encourage people to now buy from the locally the products of the locally established industries. Then we talk about the next one, which is the ban or embargo. That is total ban or placing an embargo or the refusal of the importation of a particular thing. That means any of such item imported will be labeled as a contraband property or contraband good. Then currency devaluation is the reduction in the exchange rate of a currency to another currency. That means a home currency to a foreign currency. Now, for instance, Nigeria to USA, we have $1 to 200 naira formerly, and now we have 350 to $1. That means what is happening? It means definitely that the locally made goods, or that the the currency is what? Losing its value against the international currency. Now, what happens is that the local currency in such case will be used to, for it will be, importation will be definitely higher, because the idea of the valuation is to encourage local production and for them to be exported instead of transforming local currency into foreign currency at higher rates. So in other words, these are the tools or instruments for trade protection. Terms of trade. Terms of trade. That's what we call TOT. The terms of trade refers to a measure that checks the rate of import to what? Export price indices over a period of time. For instance, when the export, we use it, in fact, to the terms of trade is a ratio of the change of a measure of the ratio of the import price index to the exporter price index. So in other words, when we try to use it to know when we are having a favorable or unfavorable terms of trade, TOT is equal to price index of imports of exports over price index of imports. Now, of course, it means that by the time this thing, if we have a favorable terms of trade, it means that TOT will be greater than 1. When we have what? Favorable TOT, term of trade. But the reverse becomes the case when we have a less than 1, because anytime we export, we are doing what? We are spending. Or anytime we import, we are spending, but anytime we export, we are gaining. So that returns. So it helps to calculate or show the condition or the nature of the country's international trade status. Now, from there, we now move down to balance of trade and balance of payment. Balance of trade. That's the next one. Balance of trade over there talks about like we said just before now, that whenever you import, we spend, but when we export, we gain. So which means there's receipts from exports and expenditure on imports. So the balance of trade is a comparison between a country's receipts on exports, visible exports in this case. If you recall, we said that trade in goods are visible trade, but trade in services are invisible, comprise the invisible trade. So in other words, the balance of trade makes a comparison on the receipts from a country's exports of visible goods, that's merchandise, and its expenditure on visible imports. In such case, it means that definitely the balance of trade only looks at what? Visible trade, compares the import and export of visible trade. Unlike balance of payment, which is the next one, balance of payment refers to the comparison of the total receipts from a country's total exports, that means both visible and visible exports, and the total imports and expenditure on total imports, which means is that visible or invisible. So in other words, the balance of payment encompasses balance of trade. Now, balance of payment can be represented or recorded in what you call the national accounts. In two accounts we call the what? The capital and current accounts. Capital accounts and current accounts. Now, the capital accounts records long-term income, long-term imports and export that involve what? Large sums. Now, for instance, where you have shipping, where you have insurance, where we have FDI, that's foreign direct investment, they are all recorded in the capital account. That is long-term imports and what? Exports, as it relates to what? To country or a country. Then, but when we talk about what? The current account is subdivided into three. You have the what? The merchandise account, the official settlement account, and we have the unilateral transfer account. Now, the merchandise account, the balance on the merchandise account is what gives us the balance of trade, because it is the part of the current account that records imports and exports of goods. So the merchandise account under the current account gives us the balance of trade. But the other side of it, the part of the current account that records short-term or recurrent import and export values is what we refer to as the official settlement account. Of course, when two countries are involved in service providing, of course, when one provides, the other one provides as well. So later we check the what balances, because they are not recorded in what? They are not physical goods. Then they are recorded in what? The official settlement account. Then you have the unilateral transfer account, which records amounts such as grants and donations, which are used to which are received or given out for what? For not for any immediate benefit or exchange of anything from the other country. That is a summary of the structure of the balance of payment account. But now, balance of trade or balance of payment could either be favorable. There is what? Favorable balance of payments. Favorable balance of payments. There is the unfavorable balance of payments. Okay, and there's balance of payment equilibrium. The favorable balance, BOP, that's balance of payment, is also called what? Balance of payment surplus. It is a situation where the receipt from a country's export is greater than the expenditure on a country's import. You call that what? Balance of payment surplus, or a favorable balance of payment. Conversely, on the other hand, you have the word unfavorable balance of payment, which is also called the balance of payment deficit. The balance of payment deficit, of course, unlike the other one, is what? A situation where the receipts from a country's exports is less than the expenditure on the country's imports. Many developing countries face the unfavorable balance of payment, but in this case, this is always serving as a goal of developing nations, or every nation. We want to achieve a balance of payment equilibrium, and that is what drives a country's activities or budgets. So they want to achieve a BOP equilibrium. Now, in achieving a BOP equilibrium, that means an unfavorable balance of payment has to be financed using different means. So that will lead us to ways of financing a deficit balance of payment. So we are talking about what? Ways of financing a balance of payment deficit. Now, the balance of payment deficit, like we said before, is a situation where the exports receipts are less than the payments on imports. So which means that the value, probably that the value of imports are actually bigger than the value of exports. Now, what is the way out? Now, first of all, the country can establishment of import substituting industries. Then they can embark on export promotion, or what we call export drive or export promotion. They can also embark on what? The currency devaluation. And talk about exchange rate control. Imposition of tariff. Imposition of tariff. Borrowing from international organizations. Now, either of these are okay, embargo or bans and so on and so forth. Now, establishment of import substitution industries means establishing goods that will, industries that will produce goods that will compete or substitute for the goods that are being imported. Now, the other one, the export drive, talks about what? Establishing or increasing the local production so that local demand can be met and there will be excess for what? For more exportation. I mean, it's establishing much more industries that will produce goods for what? For exportation. In such cases, the margin between the value of import and export will be closed up. The next one, the valuation of currency. The reason for the valuation of currency is to also promote local production and discourage importation. Since imported goods will be costlier and exported goods will be what? Will be cheaper. It is cheaper to export than to import. So you'll be. Then exchange rate control is to be able to manage an exchange rate. Is either you have what? The fixed exchange rate, or you have the floating exchange rate, or you have the managed floating exchange rate. Floating is also called flexible. So the imposition of tariffs is, of course, assignment of special duties to discourage what? Importation. Then borrowing from international organization. You can borrow so that you can use it to what? Solve the problem or finance what? The case of balance of payment deficit. Now, we've spoken about currency devaluation. We now move to the term called counter trade. In international trade, money is usually just used as a measure of value. Yes, usually physical cash is not exchanged. So in other words, when we engage in international trade, certain arrangements does not warrant the immediate exchange of goods and services, or services as the case may be. But the process whereby in an international trade, whereby goods and services are actually exchanged, or goods exchange for goods, services for services, whereby money is only used as a measure of value. That is what we refer to as counter trade. Now, we move down to before economic integration. Now, economic integration. Now, since we are talking about international trade and certain countries engage in have protectionist laws. It is still possible that there are some countries that could be friendly, because one of the advantages of international trade is that it promotes what friendly relationships or relations between or among countries. Now, in an agreement, two countries or two economies could actually go into agreement on doing a particular thing for themselves. That means anything they do for each other is talking about going across the borders. So which means affecting two economies essentially. So now, international economic integration talks about what? A practice or a process whereby the economies of two or more countries they decide to do what? To adopt certain common economic or international trade policies. Now, it might not just be trade policies, it could be economic policies, it could be political policies, it could be developmental policies or currency policies or tariff plans, So any of them that they have come together and they have decided to bring down certain things and relax it for the member nations, that is what we refer to as economic integration. In this case, certain economic integration are of four forms. We have the free trade area. We have the customs union. We have the common market. And we have the economic community. Now, a free trade area is a situation whereby a group of economies come together to remove every form of restriction in goods that are imported into, that is, goods that are exchanged among member countries. That means goods that are coming into a member country from another one, or the goods that are going to another country from a member country. Now, in such case, no form of tariff, no form of restriction is placed on them. Now, the next second one, where we call a customs union, it is a situation whereby the member countries come into agreement to have a common internal tariff for goods that are made, for the movement of goods within a country from member countries. Now, in such cases, they have a common tariff plan, they have a common boundary, they have common laws that each member country has to follow. And now, the next one is the common market. The common market is an expansion of the customs union. When we talk about the common market, the member countries come together, they agree on a common tariff plan, but at the same time, they now have free mobility. They add free mobility of all factors of production, both labor or capital, within the member countries or among the member countries. So within such, you have what? A common market. Then the next one is economic community. This is an association of different countries, usually regionalized, that they come together to have a uniform economic, developmental, social, and currency goals, as it has to protect the member countries. Many of them, of course, examples of economic community is the ECOWAS, the EEC, the ECA, and so on and so forth. That brings us to that. Then the theories of international trade. Theories of international trade. International trade theories. We have the absolute advantage, the theory or concept of absolute advantage by Adam Smith. We have the comparative cost advantage. by David Ricardo. Other advanced trade theories abound. The Heckscher-Ohlin, the mercantilist theory, and so on and so forth. But for now, our limit is on these two. The absolute advantage by Adam Smith postulates that is based on the case that countries definitely are so blessed that they should actually specialize in the production of just one thing and forget production of another. That means that that thing they can produce more, they should concentrate everything they have in production of that and import every other one that they cannot produce. But now, the case here is faulted because definitely it does not mean that all resources within a country, many a time or practically, cannot just produce only one item. There could be other things that the country can produce within a sub-region. But the idea now, that is why David Ricardo now came with the concept of comparative cost advantage, that a country should concentrate more on the items that it has what it is most endowed to produce over other countries. That means that for instance, country A and B can produce X and Y. That means that in the case of theory of absolute cost advantage, that if country A can produce X more, it should concentrate on producing X, while B will concentrate on producing Y. But in the case of comparative cost advantage, it says that country A should produce X more if it has a comparative advantage over B of producing X. It should produce more of X and less of Y. And likewise, if B has an advantage of producing Y over A, it should produce more of Y and less of X. I guess that brings us to the end of the study session on international trade. The questions will be, you have some questions rolling up on your screen in a moment. You take a look at them, attempt them, and where you have issues, you can come back to the video for solutions.